ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and children of all ages. We are here once again to discuss BUFORD Pusser. Now, in this installment, what we're going to do is listen to an audio tape that I made several years ago. It's probably been, 10 years ago that I did this. It is with Dr. Jerry Francisco. I was wanting to learn more about the autopsy process in Tennessee. I wanted to ask questions about Louise Hathcock's autopsy and why there wasn't one done on Pauline Pusser. So at any rate, sit back, listen, and at the end of this, please sure and give me your comments and remarks at the end of the session. So let's get started.
Hello?
Yes, Dr. Francisco, please.
Yes. Oh. Hello?
Dr. Francisco?
Yes.
My name is Mike Elam. I have a background in law enforcement, and this goes way back in your past, back to the days of BUFORD Pusser.
Okay.
And I was reading your autopsy report on Louise Hathcock.
Okay.
I'll tell you, I started out as a big BUFORD Pusser fan.
All right.
And I talked to Barbara Bivens several times. I don't know if you remember Barbara.
Vaguely.
At any rate, well, she spent some time trying to convince me that Louise's death may not have been necessarily the result of things happening the way that Pusser said they did. And, in reading your autopsy report, I'm beginning to agree with her. Of course, Barbara's passed away now. She passed away about a year ago. But now,
was Hathcock the owner of the bar or the?
Yes.
Yeah.
Down there at the Shamrock.
Right. Okay.
And according to your autopsy report, she was shot once in the shoulder from behind, and then one of the rounds went into her back, exited her front, but went diagonally across her body.
Okay.
And the third shot, of course, was to her head, went in her jawline and came out the back of her skull.
Right.
And I guess what's really got me is I've found several old interviews that he did in national magazines, and like I say, I was always a big fan of Pusser. But I got to reading his statements where, he talks about his first shot was to her shoulder, and then she tried to raise the gun, so he shot her a second time. And in the interviews he did with magazines, he never discussed the third shot, which was the one apparently to her head.
Right.
I know that medical examiners usually put down what they find. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel like that was happened the way that Pusser said it did? Or?
Usually, you're not able to know from the wounds themselves which is first, which is second, which is third.
Right.
And because you can't say which is first, which is second, which is third, you have to go on other evidence before you can come to that conclusion.
Well, there I'm going by his own statements.
Yeah.
Where he says the first shot was to the shoulder.
Right.
And so I'm looking at your autopsy report saying, well, the one to her shoulder, the entrance was to her back.
Okay.
And then he says the second shot was to the torso, which, that also shows as a...
back to front.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the third one going in her jawline and going at an upward angle and exiting her skull.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've talked to family members down there the day of the shooting that her teeth were impacted into the carpet.
Right.
Which leads you to believe that she was on the floor when she was shot rather than standing like the Pusser indicates.
It could be interpreted that way.
When they had a grand jury that looked at that, did anyone ever contact you about giving your interpretation of the autopsy report to the grand jury?
No.
Did you know that they didn't use your autopsy report in the grand jury hearing?
No. But the way we handled those kind of autopsies was that we were consulting with the local medical examiner.
Yeah, which was Henry Peeler.
He refers the case to us. We do the autopsy. We make our report. We send it back to the medical examiner, and then he handles it from there.
What was the protocol back then for a autopsy to be done? The local medical examiner had to request
it. If the medical examiner and the district attorney general concur, then the body was sent to Memphis for an autopsy.
So it took both parties to agree to that.
That's correct. That's correct. Because the medical examiner could deal with it only if it was suspected as a homicide, which obviously it was. If one person shoots another, that's by definition a homicide.
Sure.
So he could, on his own, just send the body down.
The medical examiner could?
Yes, but it would have to be under a written request or signature of the district attorney general.
Okay, let me move on then. And I'm sure that you've seen the old movie Walking Tall and all that routine.
Yes, I have.
Why did they not request an autopsy on Pauline Pusser?
I did go to the scene in her death. Warren Jones came down to get me to say, let's go to the scene, look at this. I'm real suspicious about all this.
Yeah.
So I went to the scene. And in looking at the scene, I could not find anything that would establish that it was not as he described it.
Okay.
But this was after the death. I don't think there was an autopsy in her. And why it wasn't, I don't have any idea.
Well, and I guess that's one of those things you should learn years later, because I just learned this myself. That Buford and Pauline were supposed to be separated at the time that happened.
That was part of Warren's suspicion.
And as a matter of fact, here last week or week before last, I went down there 4 weeks ago, and I have nothing better to do with my time, I guess. But I was so amazed by that movie back years ago when I first saw it. I always wanted to go over there and see what it was all about. And I got over there, and one of the first things that I grew suspicious of, just from my own law enforcement training, was that they said that a car pulled out from behind the church there on New Hope Road and chased them down and so on, and started firing on them there. And we measured that out, and that's only 0.7 of a mile.
Yeah.
And so I got a little bit suspicious about how a car could be behind that church in the darkness of night, because it was still before sunrise.
Right.
And be able to chase that car down with going around curves with no headlights.
Right.
And still managed to catch up with it in 0.7 of a mile. As a matter of fact, 2 or 3 of us did a basic reenactment of it. And, where one vehicle passes by the church, the other one takes off after it. The lead car just drives a constant speed, and the chase car wasn't even close by the time we got to that little bridge. The other thing I learned that really drew my suspicions, I guess, was the fact that even though she was supposed to have been shot at that first ambush site, there was a second one 2.1 miles on down the road, and all the shell casings from that rifle were found there, or the carbine were found there.
Yeah.
And so and better yet, they're sitting on the left side of the road, or the south side of the road, and you're sitting there thinking, well, they couldn't have ejected out the window, because they'd have been going into that back windscreen. If the gunman had been on the passenger side, they would have ejected into the middle of the road rather than on the left shoulder of the road. So I was trying to find out, basically, if an autopsy was ever requested on Pauline.
No, I don't think so.
Because I
don't remember doing an autopsy. And if it was done, it'd been done in Memphis.
Yeah.
There'd be no other place in West Tennessee to do them.
Right. You didn't happen to see her body at all, did you?
I don't think so.
You never saw any photographs or anything?
Not that I recall.
Okay. I was talking with Ward Moore, who was the county coroner.
Uh-huh.
And, for instance, he also, of course, as a lot of the coroners were at that time, still are to some degree, I guess, he worked at a funeral home.
Right.
And I was asking him, because I'd always heard rumors that Pauline had curlers in her hair, and it was just a rumor, and I was trying to verify that. And I asked him, I said, do you remember if she had curlers in her hair? And he said, no. He said, I can't remember, because he said, all I could focus on was how devastating that head wound was. He said the entire back of her head was gone. And he said, I had to build it out with plaster of Paris and cotton just to have something to put a wig on for the funeral.
Right. Right.
And he said, I honestly can't remember if there was curlers there or not, because he said, I was just so shocked about how much of her head was actually missing.
Right.
So, I was, and the only other death that I'm aware of that Buford was involved in was one of Russ Hamilton, but I don't think there was an autopsy on him either.
Okay.
And didn't know if you knew anything about an autopsy on him.
No. That doesn't mean there wasn't. It's just,
I'm sure you've done so many over the years that they're all hard to keep track of.
And the only thing I know about Pusser of any significance was when he died, they took a blood alcohol from him, and it was pretty sporty. I don't remember the exact number, but something like 0.19 or something like that.
I think it was 0.18.
Yeah.
Paul Irwin was the trooper that worked the accident, and I want to say he told me it was 0.18.
Yeah.
So, but there was no autopsy done on Buford either.
No, there wasn't.
See, that's one of those things I've always tried to figure out, is that, of course, the movies made it out that, everybody was after him, so on and so forth.
Makes a lot better story.
Sure it does. And, well, okay, you've seen the movie, taking us completely away from this part. You know the part where Buford was beaten and robbed there at the state line.
Right.
Early on. Of course, there's no police report of that and no medical evidence that he ever had the 192 stitches that he claimed he had.
Right. I had a couple of friends lived in the county, and it was their opinion that he wasn't anything like the portrayal in the movie.
But I was just curious about the autopsies, because, I argued with Barbara for a long time, and man, she said, if Jerry Francisco did the work, said you can count on it being accurate. And I tried to defend Pusser for the longest time, but my experience just came out and said, there's something that just does not look right with all this, because the autopsy report's saying one thing, and he's saying something else.
Right.
And of course, along the way, I've interviewed a lot of those. I've looked them up, found a lot of those old club owners, and all of them were telling me how much they had to pay to operate, and just kind of blew the movie all together for me. But
I know the frustration when you're trying to reconstruct something from past information with limited contacts. It's very hard to do.
Yeah, and at any rate, I just thought I would ask you if you knew of any other autopsies that were done.
We didn't get very much from there.
Did you know Peeler very well?
I knew of him, yeah.
I asked Ward Moore. Ward is 91 years old now, the one that was the coroner at the time that Peeler was the... and he said that they just disagree on everything about Pusser. And I said, well, and yet they're good friends.
He and Peeler disagreed on Pusser?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
I mean, like with the ambush, Peeler thinks it was a true ambush, and Moore thinks that, Moore told me, he said, I think that Buford killed her.
Well, that was Warren Jones. Warren Jones was a TBI investigator.
Yeah.
And Warren was very suspicious, but from what I could gather, there wasn't anything I could provide to support his suspicion.
Well, Warren apparently, was operating, and you know how it is in the initial phases of an investigation, he was operating without full information.
Right,
there for quite a while.
Right.
Because there for some time he didn't know that there had been 2 ambush sites.
Yeah.
He was investigating that second one where they found all the shell casings, and wasn't aware that there was a second ambush site involved.
Yeah, it gets very hard to reconstruct when somebody's already been there.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Yeah. Anything else you can tell me that might be of...
No, afraid not. Like I said, I had very little input, very little information from there. We were just providing a service, and it was a service without the coordination of the investigator giving information and us giving back information. So, there really was just very limited direct interpretation we could make beyond what we could see on the body. That was it.
Yeah. Well, having come from worked at the sheriff's office for several years, I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing what you have with me. I know I couldn't give you much I couldn't give you much information, but just from what I could tell from your autopsy report, it raises more questions to me.
I can understand that.
So,
I can understand that.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I may call you back and ask you more questions if I find out, if I get a little more information here.
Oh, okay.
All right, sir.
Bye-bye.
I appreciate your time. You have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
All right, so there you have it. Pathologist, Dr. Jerry Francisco. I did this interview about, 10 or 12 years ago, like I said, and I found it to be very interesting. I gained a lot of information from it. I'm glad that I reached out to some of these people to get their opinions and such. I don't like to be like a lot of the people that just take one side of the story or the other. I want to get down to the facts as close as I can get to them. At any rate, having heard the conversation that Dr. Francisco and I had, I would like to hear and see your comments at the page here, and let me know what you think. I have to ask myself sometimes in looking at this, do I think that there were some local politics and shenanigans that came into play during the autopsy process of both Louise and the lack of one with Pauline? So I'd, again, appreciate your comments on this. Next week, we'll have Dennis Hathcock back, and he'll be discussing what he and Johnny did the morning of the ambush after they learned that it had occurred. So be sure and come in for that. It'll be out next Thursday, 5 o'clock, 5:30. And until then, have a good one. Just remember, like Buford said, what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong, and it doesn't matter who you are.